The Spread of Islam and the Origin of the Harari Identity by Harari Freethinkers. Introduction. Why are the Harari people Muslim? It is commonly believed that 100% of the global Harari population adheres to Sunni Islam. But how did this come to be? No matter how far back the Harari people today can trace their ancestry, it will always end with a Muslim. There are many Harari oral histories explaining when and how Islam was introduced. As it turns out, these narratives clash with historical oral accounts and verifiable events. Thus, this article will attempt to construct an accurate sequence of historical events of the introduction, spread, adoption, and preservation of Islam as they relate to the Harari people. Determining the roots of Islam in this population is also key to understanding the formation of the Harari identity. This article will conclude with an exploration of the concept of the Harari identity as it relates to Islam. Early Muslim settlers and the Mahzumi dynasty. Islam initially spread in Ethiopia to its northern area, modern-day Eritrea, by traders. They would have spread Islam to those at the market villages, and to the traders' own servants and partners. In the 9th century, geographer and historian Al-Yaqubi reported Ethiopia had many mighty cities where the Arabs would come to trade. Note that these relations between the Arabs and Ethiopians were not a novel occurrence. Prior to the advent of Islam, Arabs and Ethiopians have a long and ancient history. According to Islamic tradition, during the time of Prophet Muhammad, his early followers fled to Abyssinia twice for refuge after facing persecution in their homeland. Thus before, during, and after the establishment of Islam in Arabia, Arabs were in contact with Ethiopians. And with the movement of people, comes the movement of ideas. South of the Harar area in Bali, Ethiopia, pre-10th century, it is believed Islam initially spread as a religion and a culture, not as a political force. Islam would have spread gradually in the surrounding areas through migrations of traders and adventurers who settled among the pagan people. The traders would have settled along the major trade routes. Together with their goods to sell, traders would have brought their Islamic ideas to Ethiopia, which would have mingled with the local cultures and transformed into new interpretations of Islam. It is likely that, at most, during the 9th to mid-10th centuries some Muslim traders visited and maybe settled around Harar. Muslim traders did settle in villages along trade routes to Zila from the 10th century. But these settlers did not establish their own political entities at this point. It may be that Muslim traders played an inconsistent role in converting the local pagans because it would result in reducing the potential reservoir of slaves. In the late 10th century, there was a rise of the religious and political significance of Islam in Ethiopia. This was because of many factors such as the decline in Christian power in the interior, the rise of Muslim rule of Egypt, and the revival of Red Sea trade. The result was a much more intensive exploitation of the Ethiopian interior by Muslim merchants. The heavier presence of Muslim merchants into the late 10th and 11th centuries would have led to increases in the adoption of Islam by the native population. However, there have been no reports of any major conversions into the interior prior to the 12th century. The first conversion recorded is of what appears to be the Argoba people in 1108 during the reign of Sultan Harbayar. Prior to the start of Islamization of the area, Islam coexisted with indigenous religions that were followed by the majority of the local population. According to local traditions, in 897, the Sultanate of Shoa, likely located in northern Harar, was founded by the Mahzumi, or Mahzumi, dynasty. The Muslim dynasty called themselves Mahzumi because they claimed descent from the famous Banu Makhzum Meccan clan. The dynasty went on to take control of the trade routes, allowing them to establish political entities. This would appear to be the first Muslim dynasty in the area. However, the founding date provided in the local chronicle is suspect. Neither Al-Yaqubi in the 9th century nor another historian, Al-Masudi in the 10th reported an organized Muslim community in Ethiopia. As late as the mid-10th century, Al-Masudi reported that Muslim families in Ethiopia were living under the rule of the indigenous, pagan rulers. This coincides with how the kingdom in the area from the mid-10th century to the 14th century is believed to have been under pagan rule until at least the 13th century. Pagan rulers are acknowledged in the Chronicle of the Sultanate of Shoa, which starts by reporting the death of the pagan Queen Badat, daughter of Maya, in 1063. The Sultanate of Shoa is likely the same Islamic entity as the Mahzumi dynasty. A possible reason why Muslim historians did not report on the Mahzumi dynasty, if it did exist, into the 10th century is because their travel was along the northern and eastern coast of Ethiopia, not the interior. However, at the same time, this does not excuse the lack of archaeological evidence of Muslims in the area where the Sultanate of Shoa was possibly located. Further, it has been suggested that the Sultanate of Shoa as an organized Muslim state existed centuries later, in the 12th to 13th centuries. During this time, this sultanate may have been made up of Muslims who settled in the region and operated as independent states/trading communities under pagan-ruled land. In 1128, the state attacked the neighboring Christian Amhara people, causing them to flee the area. Thus, while the founding date of the Sultanate of Shoa, or Mahzumi dynasty as the 9th century is highly improbable, by the 12th century, there does appear to be an organized Islamic state. It is believed that by the year 1200, the Argoba and other Muslims entered the Harar plateau from the west. The 13th century is when it is believed Islam began to spread into the Harari region from the east by Azila and Berbera. The Sultanate of Shoa was succeeded by the Muslim Ifat Sultanate in the 13th century. In the 16th century, the area was taken over by the Muslim Adal Sultanate who destroyed the old, refuting oral histories and the claim to Islamic roots. In contrast to the above historical evidence is the oral history of the introduction of Islam to the Harari people. According to one Harari source, a prominent Zikri, Islamic hymn, recounts the embrace of Islam. Inbam el Rianek, we have not seen you. Warbin Samenek, we heard of you. Amanabek Muhammad Rasulallah, we believed in you, O Muhammad, the messenger of Allah. The claim is that Islam reached Harar 8 years before it spread to Medina when early Muslims allegedly fled to Ethiopia during the first Hijra. The town of Ruqayya Gay is proposed as the location where the Prophet Muhammad's daughter, Ruqayya, and others stayed. The story is that these early Muslims spread the message of Islam to the Harari people who then immediately and fully accepted Islam. The Harari people then began to propagate the religion to neighboring peoples. This oral history can be refuted because it is known that according to Islamic tradition, early Muslims went to the Christian kingdom of Aksum for safety. This area is north of modern-day Harar. Furthermore, there is no archaeological evidence that suggests the early Muslims preached Islam into the Harari region in the 7th century. The earliest evidence of Muslims visiting the area was in the 8th century. In addition, there are no reports of these early Muslims traveling into Ethiopia and spreading Islam in Islamic scripture nor by Muslim historians. Based on the Hadith, it is suggested the migrants stayed with the Christian king and the other companions. There is no evidence of Muslims traveling deeper south into Ethiopia to reach Harar at this time. Also, it appears that at least some migrants didn't like being in Ethiopia and did not have a pleasant time. This is apparent from the following hadith. No, by Allah, while you were with Allah's messenger, who was feeding the hungry ones amongst you, and advised the ignorant ones amongst you, we were in the far-off hated land of Ethiopia, and all that was for the sake of Allah's messenger. By Allah, I will neither eat any food nor drink anything till I inform Allah's messenger of all that you have said. There we were harmed and frightened. If the migrants did spread Islam in Ethiopia, in the hadith above, the narrator, Asma bint Umayz, would have mentioned it after saying Prophet Muhammad had advised the ignorant ones amongst you. However, even if the persecuted followers of Muhammad did reach the ancestors of the Harari people, there is no evidence of them embracing Islam. If they did, there would be many mosques built and other traces of an Islamic lifestyle. The reality is that Islam spread gradually, and it wasn't until about 500 years after the traditional narrative of the inception of Islam, 7th century, that the first, organized Muslim community in the area formed, 12th century. As for the legend of how the town Ruqayyah was named, it's believable that it was named after the Prophet's daughter because of her importance in Islam. She didn't have to visit the town for it to be named after her. Another possibility is that the town was named after a different woman by the same name or named for other, unknown reasons. In addition to the inaccurate oral history of the founding of the Sultanate of Shoa, which cites a much earlier date, another doubtful aspect to the tradition is the ethnic origin of the Mahzumi dynasty. The tradition cites Arab, specifically Meccan origins, yet evidence suggests Ethiopian roots. For one, the Chronicle of the Sultanate of Shoa demonstrated women had political importance, which is characteristic of Ethiopian tradition and not commonly found in other Muslim regions. The other piece of evidence comes from the language spoken in the Sultanate. It is believed that a local Semitic Ethiopian language, or languages, were spoken. Semitic Ethiopian speakers also made up the successor to the Sultanate of Shoa, the Ifat Sultanate and later Adal Sultanate. Interestingly, there is also an Arab origin story to the Ifat Sultanate's Walazma dynasty. According to an oral tradition, this dynasty claims descent from Aqil ibn Abi Talib, brother of Caliph Ali, and Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, who was one of the first Arab Muslims who took refuge during the Hijra to Ethiopia. There is another claim that the dynasty was descended from El-Hassan, one of Caliph Ali's sons. There is even a legend that attempts to trace the genealogy of all Harari people to Prophet Muhammad himself. It is believed that Sheikh Umar ar-Rida, aka Al-Abadr, the founding saint of Harar, is a descendant of Prophet Muhammad through Abu Bakr. Because the Harari people believe they are descendants of Al-Abadr, the saint thus serves as the genealogical link between them and Prophet Muhammad. This claim is not verifiable and is one example of many other Muslims in the Horn of Africa who trace their genealogies to popular Islamic figures or to Prophet Muhammad. These assertions are rarely verified and highly unlikely to be true. The appeal to Arab, and ideally Meccan origins may stem from the Ethiopian Muslims' desire to legitimize their Muslim identity and social status in relation to Arabs. Perhaps stories of ancestral connection to well-known Islamic figures was a way to make connections with Arabs and other Muslims. The Ethiopian Muslims would have also faced anti-black racism and were considered lower in social status than Arabs. To counter that, claiming to have a pious, famous Arab Muslim ancestor could potentially allow an Ethiopian Muslim to reach a higher social status. A similar phenomenon occurred in Morocco, where alleged patrilineage from the Prophet was emphasized while black ancestry was stigmatized. This sentiment of subordination and reimagining of the native history of non-Arab Muslims is echoed in the prologue of V.S. Naipaul's book, Beyond Belief, Islamic Excursions Among Converted People, 1998. The exception is that for the Harari people, Islam blended with the indigenous cultures/religions and didn't completely replace traces of the past. The following is a quote from this book. Islam is in its origins an Arab religion. Everyone not an Arab who is a Muslim is a convert. Islam is not simply a matter of conscience or private belief. It makes imperial demands. A convert's worldview alters. His holy places are in Arab lands, his language is Arabic. His idea of history alters. He rejects his own, he becomes, whether he likes it or not, a part of the Arab story. The convert has to turn away from everything that is his. The disturbance for societies is immense, and even after 1,000 years, can remain unresolved. The turning away has to be done again and again. An Arab ancestor meant not only the escaping of African roots, but also of pagan ancestry. In Islam, those who follow traditional religions, especially polytheistic religions, are held in high contempt. The desire to disassociate from pagan ancestry is illustrated by the document cited earlier, which makes the following extraordinary claim. Based on the Inbem el-Rianek Zikr, which indicates that the people were waiting for the message to come and accept Islam without resistance, and that the Hararis are fully Muslim community, it is reasonable to conclude that Hararis were the people of the book before they accepted Islam. According to Islamic scripture, people of the book refer to Christians and Jews. Before converting to Islam, the ancestors of the modern-day Harari people were likely largely pagan with some Christians as well, which will be explored towards the end of this article. The claim that they were willing to accept Islam without resistance is a broad generalization and is impossible. To suddenly change one's entire way of life and adopt a new identity is not something everyone would unanimously agree to. An example of resistance to Islam is the murder of an Argoba sheikh, Umar Salani, and dozens of his followers by pagan Itu, Aramo, people in the 1870s. The Ita live in West Harargay. Another example is the people who practiced indigenous religions and lived in close proximity with the expanding Sultanate of Shoa and Christian Empire. The people continued to practice their traditional way of life from the 10th century to the 14th, at which point they were converted to Christianity. If a group of people did not want to accept Islam as their new way of life, another option would be to leave the area. In Uganda, it is believed the inhabitants of a village around a holy tree were originally immigrants from the Ethiopian highlands. Perhaps these individuals decided to leave Ethiopia, or were forced to flee, because they wanted to preserve their way of life. It is therefore not unimaginable that in the past some progenitors of the Harari people did resist the message of Islam and wished to keep the way of life of their ancestors. Early introductions to Islam, Sufism, Shafi'i and Shi'a. Research suggests Islam was propagated in the area around Harar mainly by followers of Sufi orders. Sufi missionaries were the source of many conversions in sub-Saharan Africa. Conversion to Islam from Christianity would have been relatively easy and quick due to shared religious ideas. Conversion from pagan and polytheistic religions was difficult, so Sufi missionaries made Islam appealing by assimilating it into existing religious traditions. This process was facilitated by the mystical nature of Sufism. It is believed that many people living in the area around Harar, east of the Awash River, were introduced to Islam in the 10th/11th century by Sheikh Ismail Jabardi, who traveled from northern Somalia. This was during the rising significance of Islam in Ethiopia and heavier presence of Muslim merchants. Sheikh Ismail Jabardi spread Islam by Islamizing their existing belief systems. It is known that a method in which Islam spread was by preaching at or near existing, pagan places of worship. Instead of destroying these pre-Islamic sites, they were transformed into Islamic ones. The sites then became dedicated to venerating the very men who preached there as saints. The Sufi presence in Harar became more organized in the 15th century when a man named Sharif Abu Bakr ibn Abdullah al-Idaris visited Harar and established the Qadriya Sufi order. Sufism has formed the basis of Islam in Harar and continues to be the traditional, though not modern, method of Islamic practice in the area. During this time as well, in 1430, a large-scale conversion of the Harari people occurred by Sheikh Ibrahim Abu Zaharbi. Through Islamic Sufism, the spiritual world beliefs of the pagan Harari people were modified through syncretism to become acceptable within Islam. However, it has been proposed that there may have been different levels of assimilation of Islam. Some had Islam incorporated into their life through only superficial cultural elements, while others adopted conservative religious practices. In addition to Sufism, Shafi'ism was the school of thought followed by the rulers of the Ifat Sultanate, late 13th to the 15th centuries. Though, interestingly, according to Syrian scholar al-Amari, in the 14th century most Ethiopian Muslims practiced Hanafi Islam. In addition, Shia Islam may also have early Islamic roots in Harar. There is a theory that Harar was founded by exiled Fatimites fleeing Baghdad who founded 5 villages on a hill. They allegedly spread Shia Islam among the locals. This legend is supported by the fact that similar to the Shiites, the Harari people celebrate Ashura and refer to Fatima and Ali on various occasions. Further, in the 14th century, Ibn Battuta referred to the Muslims at nearby Zayla, Somalia, as inhabited by mostly Rafida, which is a term applied to non-Sunni Muslims including Shiites. The adoption of Islam and culture. Why might a non-Muslim in Ethiopia convert to Islam? At different points in history, Ethiopians would have had both free choices to convert to Islam and experienced coercion and forced conversion. In a non-Islamic state, individual Ethiopians could have chosen to convert to Islam to benefit from strengthened social or political ties. Converting to Islam would facilitate gaining economic opportunities and wealth through relations with Muslim merchants. They could have also chosen to accept Islam to benefit from safety during war by supporting the Muslim side if they were winning. Some Ethiopians could have also converted out of curiosity and interest in the new, foreign religion. Others may have been genuinely convinced by preachers that Islam is true. One way non-Muslim Ethiopian men would convert to Islam is if he wished to marry a Muslim woman. This is because according to traditional interpretations of Islam, Muslim women are forbidden to marry non-Muslim men. Men in Ethiopia could have also been manipulated into Islam in a way similar to a method used in Zanzibar. In this case, young men were inducted into Islam and taught to repeat Islamic verses in an attempt to divide the indigenous people. The conversion of Ethiopian rulers to Islam meant Islam could be institutionalized by establishing mosques, mandating Islamic education for all children, and enforcing Sharia law. This would lead to large segments of a non-Muslim population converting to Islam. After the initial population converted, their children would be raised as Muslims, thus further increasing the Muslim population. In an Islamic state, large groups of non-Muslims could be coerced into accepting Islam because it meant an improved quality of life by escaping the marginalization due to dhimmi status. Under Islamic rule, the dhimmi have endured restrictions on freedom, employment, inequalities in society, humiliation, and poorer treatment than Muslims, all because they were not Muslim. This degrading treatment is sanctioned in the Quran and Tafsir, where it says the payment of jizya is a sign of kufr, non-belief, and disgrace, thus the dhimmi must be continuously reminded of their lower status compared to Muslims. If the dhimmi wished to maintain their religion and not relocate, this was their reality. Politically driven conversion to Islam would have begun in Ethiopia during the establishment of the first Muslim political entities during around the 13th century, as previously mentioned. Forced conversion to Islam occurred during religiously motivated warfare, Jihad, a topic that will be discussed later on in this piece. Similarly, research by Timothy Insall in 2017 also determined that there were many factors that would have influenced a Harari person to convert to Islam aside from genuine conviction. These include the impact of trade, saints, religious preachers, and proselytization, benefits gained from Arabic literacy and administration systems, enhanced power, prestige, warfare, and belonging to the larger Muslim community. Regardless of how one's initial ancestor converted to Islam over hundreds of years, a major contributor to the increase in the Ethiopian Muslim population was Muslims having children. It must be stated that historically in Ethiopia and globally, rationalism wasn't the norm. While living in harsh and dangerous living conditions, people did what they could to survive. Their time and energy was spent on staying alive. Most people didn't have free time to contemplate their existence and whether their religion or way of life was true or made sense. Even today in the 21st century, the majority of people simply follow the religion of their parents and never question it or think of leaving it. It should be noted that the way Islam is thought of as a religion today may not have been how it was thought of historically. The early blending of pre-Islamic beliefs with Islamic ones could have been thought of as a modification of their existing way of life, not a replacement. The ancestors of the Harari people could also hold both their ancestral practices and Islam together, if they did not contend with Islam. Today, some of these indigenous beliefs are visible in what is considered Harari culture. Essentially, elements of the Harari way of life that aren't mentioned in Islam, yet are not opposed to it, become labeled as culture. Historically, the formation of Harar's culture was a deliberate process intended to shape the culture in a way that was consistent with Islam. But where does culture start and religion begin? Islam can be interpreted in many ways, but if enforced by the state, it becomes the required lifestyle with a set of customs, rituals, and beliefs that its citizens must adhere to or else face the consequences. The Harari culture is also a way of life, with customs, rituals, and beliefs. Islam was made by merging pre-Islamic Arabian religions, Christianity, Judaism, and customs from tribes in the area. Just like Islam is a combination of different religions and customs, cultural practices of Muslims were also shaped by the teachings and restrictions of Islam. In short, religions are shaped by cultures and cultures are shaped by religions. An example of this is the concept of saints in Harar. It is believed that these saints are Islamized versions of what was once ancestral worship before Islam was introduced. Today, instead of thinking of the saints as having religious significance, they are largely dismissed as superstitious elements of Harari culture. The Harla people, pre-6th century. It has been asserted by many historians that the Harari people are likely the descendants of an ancient Harla people. The Harla people can be traced to the 6th century in a region named Harla. These highly developed peasant civilizations are believed to have practiced a traditional pagan belief system. However, this theory that the modern Harari people are the descendants of the Harla people may not be entirely true. There is a myth that the Harla were a legendary group of giants. They were allegedly destroyed by supernatural powers because of their pride. It is asserted that this legend is based on a similar Aramo story about a wealthy, prideful man who was punished by the Creator. The rock paintings around the area where Harla are believed to have lived have meanings that are apparent in the Aramo culture and beliefs such as Wak. This suggests the ancient drawings, though their date is unknown, are from Cushitic peoples who were early inhabitants of the area. Because the Harla are believed to have lived in those areas, they may have been Cushitic in origin. 6th to 12th century, early Muslim settlement. While Sheikh Ismail Jabarti is credited with introducing Islam to the people who lived around Harar in the 10th–11th century, the extent of his conversions is unknown. Around Harar there are settlements called Harla and Ganda Harla. Ganda Harla can be dated to the 15th century and was likely formed before or around the same time as the founding of Harar. In contrast, Harla was a long-standing settlement that can be dated to the 6th century. The presence of animal remains with evidence of Islamic butchery techniques suggests the appearance of Muslim traders. The evidence is dated to at least 4 centuries before the earliest evidence of a settled Muslim community at Harla by the mid-12th century. This means before settling at Harla, Muslim traders were in contact with the local people. While some indigenous people may have adopted Islam, it appears that the population was mostly pagan due to the persistence of local ceramics observed at Harla sites. It is believed that ceramics may have been important during the Islamization of the area by acting as unifying symbols of the Islamic polities. One can see the legacy of ceramics in Harari history as they have been traditionally displayed on the walls of homes. Thus, Harla was a cosmopolitan settlement, including mostly non-Muslim people, but also some Muslims. Furthermore, excavations at Harla and Ganda Harla have uncovered remains of Suids, wild boar and bush pig, which also suggest either non-Muslim populations or non-observance of Islamic dietary laws. 13th to 16th centuries, growth of Muslim population. In the 13th century Universal Geography by Ibn Sa'd al-Maghribi, he mentions a large geographical area called Kazla. The Kazla area existed east of the Ethiopian Empire, north of the equator to a mountain called Muris and extended northeast near the sea coast. The people there were highly respected by the, mostly, Christian Habesha. The chronicle mentions they were involved in gold and silver mining, but it does not mention the religion of the people. These people lived in the area where the legendary Harla are believed to have lived. Ibn Sa'd al-Maghribi also mentions an Islamic state located on the eastern edge of Shua with a capital of Wifat. This is likely what is now known as the Ifat Sultanate. Because Ibn Sa'd al-Maghribi does not connect Kazla as part of this Muslim state, nor mention them as Muslim at all, it can be assumed that the people were, at least for the most part, pagan. This is supported by the conclusion made previously whereby the mid-12th century, despite a settled Muslim community, the population in that area remained largely pagan. However, regardless of the population's religious affiliation, the Harla was governed under their own Harla Sultanate. This entity had a tributary status to the larger Sultanate of Ifat during the late 13th to 15th centuries. The earliest historical mention of the word Harla was in the 14th century. Ethiopian Emperor Amda records an attack by the Harla people who lived in modern-day Somaliland. The Futu al-Habasha, the conquest of Abyssinia, of the 16th century mentions the Harla as a distinct group of Muslims. They lived alongside the Adare people west of the Awash River in the central Ethiopian highlands. The Adare and the Harla are believed to have spoken a closely related language. After the Jihad of the 16th century, which is described in a later section, most of the Harla left the budding city of Harar while many Adare people stayed. Interestingly, the Kureu Aramo may not have called the Muslim Harla people Harla. Instead, they called them Hawaso. This is a general term that refers to people who live around the Awash River. Thus, the Harla people were possibly Cushitic pagans from the 6th century, if not earlier, who practiced the same ancestral religion as the Somali and the Aramo people. It is interesting to note that Christianity may have also been practiced before Islam in the region. This is due to the 13th century Christian burials that were found in modern-day Somaliland. It wasn't until about the late 13th or 14th century when a sizable population of the Harla people east of the Awash River converted to Islam. Some of the Harla people converted to Islam and were Muslim subjects of the Ifat and the Adal sultanates. Others remained pagan until they were forced to convert or flee during the Jihad of the 16th century. The Adare people. From the previous section, it can be asserted that the modern-day Harari people are largely from the Adare people who stayed in Harar in the 16th century. There are various Semitic-speaking groups of Ethiopians who are linguistically, historically, and culturally related to the Harari. These groups are the Silte, Wulane, Garage, and Argoba. It is believed that Semitic-speaking people moved south during the Aksumite era. One of those groups may have been the Adare people. If this is true, this means the Adare people were originally pagans and/or Christians who lived in the Aksumite Empire. If the Adare did not originate from Aksum, the following are two other possibilities for their origins. The Adare may have initially lived in the area east of the Awash River alongside the Harla and other peoples. This would have been from the 6th century, if not earlier, when it is known that a civilization existed in that area. This narrative fits the belief that the area where the Harla lived was a cosmopolitan with a variety of people living and interacting. When Islam started spreading with the eventual inclusion of the Harla area into the Ifat Sultanate, those who converted to Islam became the ancestors of the Harari people. The second suggestion is that the Adare always lived west of the Awash River and not around the Harla area. They could have originated during the Sultanate of Shoa or Ifat Sultanate starting from the 12th or 13th century. The inhabitants of these Islamic states could have been Islamized Ethiopians of various backgrounds. For example, the Islamized Argoba are believed to have moved into the area from the west in the 13th century. This is supported by the observance by the 13th century geographer Ibn Sa'd al-Maghribi. Jihad and mass conversion to Islam. Ethiopia is home to pagans, Christians, Muslims, and Jews. The spread of Islam into the country marked the last major religion to date. The growing Muslim communities in the Harar region during the 12th and 13th centuries were governing themselves yet were living under the rule of non-Muslim empires. From the very beginning of the history of the Sultanate of Shoa, Mahzumi Empire, the death of the local Queen Badat, Gudat, is recalled in 1063. The Muslims would bring tributes of a fixed amount to the Christian kings every year. The Christian, Amhara, kings granted authority to the Muslim kings but ultimately had supreme control over them. There were multiple Muslim sheikdoms along trade routes. These communities were mutually independent, and experienced intense political and commercial rivalry. Even under the threat of Christian domination of the area, the Muslims remained disconnected. The lack of unity among the different Ethiopian Muslims in the areas around Harar was reported by both 14th century al-Amari and 14th/15th century al-Makrizi. This was a major reason for the relative weakness of Islam in Ethiopia. Similarly, the relationship between the Muslim and Christian empires fluctuated throughout the years from peaceful coexistence to violent wars. For example, in the 14th century, the Christian emperor Amdasayan chronicles how subjects of his empire were captured by the neighboring Islamic empire and were forced to convert to Islam. In the 16th century, it is estimated that Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi's Ahmad Gran jihad against the Christian empire led to mass enslavement and forced conversion of 9 out of 10 Christians to Islam. The Muslims took control of Ethiopian provinces and tremendously expanded the slave trade in those areas. Ahmad Gran despised the Christians and even ended the centuries-old practice of paying tribute to the Christian Ethiopian Empire. He regarded them as infidels who deserved to be fought, converted and enslaved. All churches and monasteries were looted and destroyed. By the end of the Jihad in 1543, the Christians recovered and enslaved the Muslims, converting them to Christianity. During this tumultuous period, the shifting boundaries of Islamic and Christian control would have left the religious identities of the Ethiopian people in flux. During a single lifetime, an Ethiopian might convert from their religion of birth to another and then revert back. The formation of the Harari ethnicity and social identity. It is urban Islam which preserves and transmits Islam in its most distinctive sense. In Africa, this transmission is through actual contact at the markets in the towns and by the wayside, through itinerant merchants and Hajj priests, and through Quranic schools set up in villages. Islam in Ethiopia, 1952. In 1520/1, as the new capital of the Adal Sultanate, Harar became the primary Islamic center on the plateau, replacing Funyanbira and Dakar. The local people were moved from Dakar to what became Harar. It is believed that the rulers and the majority of the Muslim population in the Adal Sultanate were Semitic-speaking Ethiopians. For example, Dakar was home to both sedentary and nomadic populations. The Semitic-speaking Harla and Adare formed the sedentary population. Somalis and other groups were nomadic. The Silte and the Wulane also lived alongside the Harari before leaving the city. The ethnicity of the modern-day Harari people can be described as the result of mixing between Ethiopians and Muslim foreigners. This theory has been suggested before. The growth of communities of mixed foreign and local African populations around Harar starting from the 12th and 13th centuries would have led to visible changes to the people. Such mixing with foreigners could explain the gradient of skin tones from light to dark that is apparent within the Harari people today. However, the extent to which the Harari people are descended from Arab and other Muslims is not agreed upon in academia. An alternative hypothesis is that the Harari people are largely indigenous Ethiopians, with only some of the population possessing significant non-Ethiopian ancestry. The gradient of skin tones could then be attributed to inherent genetic diversity within the local people or even mixture with non-Ethiopians prior to the influx of Muslim settlers. Nevertheless, the settlement of foreign Muslims changed the social structure of the local people. The offspring of these immigrants with the locals formed an elite, wealthy, social class and slave trading class. Their lighter skin tones were socially valued by the Arabs, thus earning them a higher social status than darker-skinned Ethiopians. The tiered social hierarchy comprised of foreign Muslim traders, mixed Ethiopian Muslims and the native Ethiopian Muslims on top, while non-Muslim Ethiopians and slaves were at the bottom. This is why the majority of slaves were the darkest shade of black. This colorism is present even today, where in the Harari language the word K, red, refers to light skin tones and is valued and sometimes even preferred to Te or Dama, which refers to dark skin tones. Historically, the reference to light skin tones as K and this preference over darker skin tones was started by Arab, and other non-African, Muslim slave traders. Another way the society changed because of mixing with Muslims was in regards to the new Sharia law. If the budding Harari community was like the mixed Wangwana of Zanzibar, one can expect the Islamized population turning their backs to their fellow non-Muslim Ethiopians. The new group was stratified in many ways. As an African population, they were likely originally segregated based on shared culture, language, and other religions already present, Christianity and traditional. Through the various introductions of Islam and Muslim attitudes, the community was now also segregated based on skin tone and variations of Islam. Thus, Islam and Muslims gave Ethiopians more ways to see themselves as different from others around them. Historically, the Harari people act as an exclusive in-group. However, marriages between Harari and non-Harari people did sometimes occur for strategic purposes. If a non-Harari man wished to marry a Harari woman, he had to pay a higher bride price. Those of other ethnic groups who wanted to be accepted into the community had to assimilate. To do so, they would have to learn the ways of life of the Harari people, language, religion, culture, dress. Once they do, they would earn the title, Gay Lamad, and be socially regarded as Gayusu, person of the city. For example, historically, the neighboring Oromo and Somali people have assimilated into the Harari community. During different points in history, being accepted into the Harari community was desirable because it came with benefits such as direct access to new trade goods. The city of Harar was founded in the 16th century. During the early 1550s, Amir Nur instructed the building of a wall around Harar to protect it from the Christians and attacks from the migrating Oromos. But the physical barrier did much more than keep those unwanted out. The wall had social significance as it contributed to the exclusionary nature of the new Harari identity. The Harari people started to see themselves as civilized within the wall, while those outside, in the countryside, were associated with incivility. Amir Nur instructed the resettlement of Ethiopian Muslims around Harar to within its new walls to protect them from the Oromos. However, the resettlement led to fights between different tribes due to their heterogeneous backgrounds. Amir Nur also instructed the arbitration of those fights and ordered the destruction of all genealogies so that all inhabitants of the walled town could be considered equally as people of the city, or Gayusu. The city was likely given the name Harar during its establishment as the capital of the Adal Sultanate. The establishment and naming of the city, the construction of the wall, and the aggregation of Ethiopian Muslims into the area together led to a new social identity. This means that Amir Nur was not only responsible for the wall, but he also played a major role in the genesis of the Harari identity. The sanctity of Harar and its people is related to its formation. The exclusion of the foreign and the inclusion of the self. The label Harari or Gaysu became a geographical identity to refer to all the Muslims in the city. The city was exclusively Muslim for over 300 years. Non-Muslims were not allowed within the city's walls. The Harari ruler and people threatened non-Muslims with death should they enter. The Harari people believed the prosperity of the city depended on the exclusion of non-Muslim travelers. The city was thus an echo chamber where the government could take full control of its citizens by eliminating outside influences that might allow citizens to think differently. Harar's position as an urban center of scriptural Islamic teaching also strengthened the Muslim identity of its people. The consequence of not having access to Arabic scripture and learned scholars is seen in other Islamized areas of Ethiopia. In some areas without access to scripture, religious flexibility exists whereby the people may choose to convert from and to Islam for various reasons. The sometimes lax adherence to Islam in the country puts into question the perceptions of religious coexistence and non-exclusivist identification. In essence, variation in Islamic conservatism throughout Ethiopia is correlated with access to Islamic scholarship. The lack of access to Islamic institutions is also believed to have contributed to the development of a religion called Fandanano. This religion was practiced by genealogical relatives of the Harari, the Hadaya people, starting from the 17th century. The religion began to form when the Hidayah physically moved away from Islamic centers in eastern Ethiopia like Harar. Through interactions with neighboring people, Fandanano became a mix of Islam, Christianity, and pagan religions. Similar to how Muslim rulers used Islamic scholarship to counteract people from straying away from Islam, the development of Christian scripture in Ethiopia during the 15th century was actively used to counteract the persistence of pagan practices. And as mentioned previously, the Harari people had also actively prevented un-Islamic practices in Harar throughout history. The foundation of the Harari identity is adherence to Sunni Islam and Harari culture, Adare. Both religion and culture together dictate the manner, dress, life choices, and practices of the Harari people. The Harari identity was threatened after 1887 during the Battle of Chalenko. This battle was a devastating loss for the Harari people to the Christian Empire of Ethiopia. In addition to the large number of casualties suffered, the defeat resulted in the opening of the Forbidden City to non-Muslims as part of the broader Ethiopian Empire. This led to the influx of non-Muslims like the Christian Amhara, who migrated to Harar during the reign of Emperor Menelik II from 1889 to 1913. Before 1887, there were no Christians in Harar. Consistent with the exclusionary nature of the Harari culture, the Christian Amhara are not socially regarded as Harari, even if they were born and raised in the city. The Harari identity was built on Islam being the common denominator among the different Ethiopian Muslims in the area and remains a title bestowed strictly to Muslims. The result of Harar opening up to the non-Muslim world led to precisely what Amir Nur feared: the exposure to outside ideas. For example, outside influences and the increase of women's education led to changes to Harari social customs and values over time. As described by this article, the arrival of Islam to the area came after the traditional, pagan religions and Christianity. Islam was seen as an inferior religion by the Christian Empire who ruled over the Muslim communities for hundreds of years. The suppression and discrimination of the Muslims in Ethiopia later manifested into pride in Islam and opposition from the injustices committed by Ethiopian authorities. It was through local self-governance by community associations like Afocha that the Harari population was able to maintain and pass on their culture amidst Christian rule. The Harari also derived pride in their survival after the Chalenko War in 1887. In remembrance of the war, the Harari paint their furniture red to signify the bloodshed of the slain soldiers. Harari legends about Harar's formation. The above explanation of the formation of Harar differs from Harari legends. According to legend, Harar has a long list of rulers that date back to the 9th century. However, the legitimate rulers from the legend reigned through different kingdoms and sultanates over various parts of Ethiopia, not Harar specifically. There are two slightly different accounts on the founding of Harar. One is that Harar was formed by unifying 7 formerly independent villages. The unification of the villages is thought to have occurred hundreds of years prior to the 16th century. The other legend is that the 7 villages were abandoned one after another, with Harar being the final settlement. The villages were called Askanti Gay, Tukhan Gay, Hassan Gay, Harwe Gay, Rukiya Gay, or Ruhat Gay, Faraka Gay, and Samti Gay, or Kanti Gay. According to this account, Harar was founded in the 7th century. While these legends assert much earlier founding dates than archaeological and historical evidence suggests, perhaps the village names are accurate. The different Ethiopian Muslims in the area might have lived in those villages prior to being resettled into Harar by Amir Nur in the 16th century. The way in which the people moved from village to village before settling in Harar relates to the label Adare. As mentioned previously, the Adare people were an early and original part of the Harari community. The modern-day Harari have historically been called Adare by other ethnic groups. This term is derived from the Gez verb adare, meaning, he made a stop, he got settled instead of moving from place to place. Note that the term Adare is now considered derogatory. Therefore, while both legends are not fully supported by this article, they perhaps provide insights into the living conditions of Ethiopian Muslims prior to the formation of Harar. Conclusion. As Ethiopians, the ancestors to the modern-day Harari people would have had contact with early Muslims due to their existing, ancient social relations with the Middle East. However, the introduction of Islam to the ancestral Harari people was not during the lifetime of the Prophet as oral histories claim. Instead, the introduction and adoption of Islam was a slow and gradual process starting from the 9th century. During the 10th century, for political reasons, the Islamization process increased. The vehicles of Islamization first involved traders, then Sufi preachers, and then war. Islam was thus spread through nonviolent and violent ways during different times throughout history. The ancestors of the Harari people could have converted for many reasons. The sincere belief that Islam was the only true, correct religion is just one of those reasons. The main propagator of Islam was, and continues to be, childbirth. The expression of Islam blended with the pre-Islamic religions at the time. The spread of Islam included different Islamic schools of thought and led to different levels of Islamization throughout the region. Today, the version of Islam practiced by the Harari people includes remnants of pre-Islamic beliefs and customs and are sometimes dismissed as culture. Islamic sultanates emerged in the region starting from the 12th century. They were led and populated by Ethiopian Muslims as the majority, not Arab Muslims. In the 16th century, the Harari people as a social and ethnic group was formed due to political restructuring and the desire to have homogeneous, unified Muslim subjects of the Sultanate. The preservation of the Harari people as a Muslim community was due to the physical isolation of the people, the focus on learning Islamic scripture, and the development of exclusionary social customs. The Harari take pride in their social/ethnic identity. This is in part from surviving the tragedy of the Chalenko War and managing to preserve their language and culture amidst suppression during Christian rule. Because the Harari identity was once threatened to no longer exist, the ability to express this identity is associated with liberation and pride. The expression and preservation of the Harari identity is thus done in appreciation of the ancestors who faced adversity, keeping it alive. While Harari legends suggest a much older founding date for the city of Harar, this does not understate the significance of the people. The 500-year-old Harari identity is a unique product of pre-Islamic religious elements, customs from various East African groups, cultural influences from other Muslims, the Harari people themselves, and of course, Islam. The Harari identity has changed, is changing, and will continue to change as time moves forward.